The rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the mansion as though nature itself was restless, whispering secrets through every droplet. Inside, in the silence of polished marble floors and echoing chandeliers, one man's suspicion burned hotter than any storm outside. Richard Alden, a millionaire known for his ruthless business mind and cold exterior, sat alone in his study. His eyes were fixed on the large safe built into the wall, its heavy steel door creaking open just slightly. Inside glimmered stacks of $100 bills and heirlooms worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. To Richard, the open safe wasn't carelessness. It was bait. A test. A trap for the one person he had quietly begun to distrust, the maid who had been working under his roof for months. He had grown tired of wondering if her polite smiles and quiet demeanor were a mask hiding greedy intentions. Tonight, he would know the truth. Before I take you deeper into this story of trust, betrayal, and the kind of humanity that can change even the coldest of hearts, I want to pause and ask something of you. If you believe in the power of kindness, forgiveness, and stories that touch the soul, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Kindness Corner, and share it with someone who could use a reminder that goodness still exists in this world. And don't forget to comment your thoughts, because your words can inspire others just as much as this story might inspire you. Richard had built his fortune through relentless work, clever deals, and a refusal to ever let emotion guide him. To him, people could not be trusted, everyone had a price. He carried scars of betrayal from his younger years, when even those closest to him had taken advantage of his generosity. The bitter lesson he learned was simple: trust no one fully, not even those who serve in silence. That's why, as he left the safe open, he positioned cameras to record every corner of his study, every angle of the heavy vault. He then pretended to leave the mansion for the evening, retreating instead to a hidden room connected by a hallway, where he could watch everything unfold on his monitors. Hours passed. The house was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of cleaning in the distance. Then, around 9 o'clock, soft footsteps echoed on the polished floors as Elena, the maid, entered the study. She was a small woman in her early 40s, dressed in a plain uniform with her dark hair tied back neatly. She walked in with a cleaning cart, her movements graceful but worn by years of labor. Richard leaned forward at his monitor, his heart pounding. He watched as her eyes instinctively swept the room, catching sight of the safe door ajar. For the first time, he saw hesitation cross her face. She froze, staring at the treasure inside. Richard smirked coldly. This was the moment he expected. The test. Would she take the bait? He zoomed in on her face, watching her expression carefully. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the rag in her grasp. Her eyes lingered on the stacks of cash, on the jewelry that sparkled under the dim light. She stepped closer, so close Richard could almost hear the beating of her heart through the screen. He clenched his jaw. This is it. But what happened next wasn't what Richard expected. Instead of reaching inside, Elena knelt down in front of the safe. From her pocket, she pulled out a small, folded photograph. She placed it gently on the edge of the cart and pressed her hand against her chest. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered something softly, words the camera microphones couldn't fully capture. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled out a notebook. Inside, carefully tucked, was a letter. She read it quietly to herself, her tears dripping onto the page. Then she looked back at the safe again, shaking her head with a painful smile, as though life itself was mocking her. She whispered, "Not mine, never mine," before shutting the door of the safe completely, securing it as though it were her own. Richard's smirk faded instantly. He leaned closer to the screen, his brow furrowing. This wasn't what he had prepared for. He expected greed, maybe even panic, but instead, he saw sorrow, restraint, and an aching kind of dignity that pierced through the walls of his cynicism. He needed to know what that photo and letter were. When Elena left the study, Richard followed quietly from his hidden passage. Later, When she had retired to her small room in the back quarters of the mansion, Richard slipped inside the study to check the cameras again. He rewound the footage, pausing on the moment Elena placed the photograph on the cart. Zooming in, his breath caught. It was an old, worn picture of a young boy with a frail smile. The child looked thin, pale, yet his eyes glowed with hope. Next to the photo was the letter. On the visible part of the page, Richard read only a few words, "Mama, one day I'll be strong. Please don't worry about me." Richard sat back in his chair, stunned. For the first time in years, his heart felt heavy, not with suspicion or anger, but with guilt. The next day, Richard couldn't help but watch Elena more closely. He noticed the quiet way she moved about the house, the way her hands were rough from years of work, the way she seemed to carry invisible burdens with her everywhere. He followed her discreetly when she left in the evening and discovered something that shook him even more deeply. Elena didn't go home to rest in luxury with stolen riches. She walked to a small, run-down apartment on the poorer side of town. There, Richard saw her unlock the door and rush inside. Through the window, he caught sight of the boy from the photo, hooked up to medical tubes, fighting for every breath. Elena knelt beside him, stroking his hair, whispering encouragements. That night, Richard returned home unable to sleep. He thought of the trap he had set, the cruelty behind his suspicion, the coldness of his own heart. For so long he had believed everyone was driven by greed, yet here was a woman with every reason to steal, every temptation laid before her, and she had chosen honesty. She had chosen dignity, even while carrying a mountain of pain. The following morning, Richard called Elena into his study. His voice shook as he told her he had forgotten the safe open and wanted to thank her for closing it. Elena, surprised, only bowed her head humbly and said, "It wasn't mine to touch, sir." Her words, so simple and pure, struck him deeper than any speech ever could. In that moment, Richard realized he had more wealth than he could ever spend, but Elena carried riches of the heart that money could never buy. Over the next few weeks, Richard's life began to change. Quietly, without telling her, he arranged for the best doctors to treat Elena's son. He covered the medical bills anonymously and even renovated her apartment. Elena wept when the doctors informed her that her child's condition was improving thanks to a sudden benefactor. She never knew who was behind it, until one evening, Richard visited her small apartment himself. For the first time, he didn't arrive as the cold millionaire, but as a man with tears in his eyes. He told Elena everything, about the trap, the safe, the cameras. He confessed his shame and begged for forgiveness. Elena, though shocked, only smiled through her tears. She forgave him instantly, saying, "Sometimes life tests us in cruel ways. But kindness can heal wounds, even the ones we don't see." Her words broke the last barrier around Richard's hardened heart. From that day on, Richard became a different man. He didn't just help Elena's family. He began funding scholarships for children, donating to hospitals, and supporting families who struggled as Elena once did. He had learned that wealth was not meant to build walls of suspicion, but bridges of compassion. And every time he looked at Elena, he remembered the night she shut the safe and whispered, "Not mine." Those two words had saved his soul. Before we end, I have a special request. If this story touched your heart, please comment the words, "Kindness is priceless," below. Let's fill the comments section with hope, so anyone who stumbles upon this video is reminded of the power of honesty, compassion, and forgiveness. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner for more stories that will remind you of the good that still exists in this world.